Republican primaries caucuses in 15 states, 865 delegates at stake. Former President Donald Trump widely expected to sweep the races in all of the states holding contests today. Last night, Trump won the North Dakota Republican caucuses, beating Nikki Haley by about 70 points. Trump likely will be awarded all 29 of that state's delegates. In an interview with conservative media company RSBN last night, Donald Trump expressed confidence heading into today's vote, while Nikki Haley made her closing arguments to voters in Texas in front of a packed rally in Fort Worth.
I just say to the people that are watching now, if you could, go out and vote, because it's not Haley, she's not a problem. I think she's very negative for the party, but she's not a problem in terms of winning, because we're winning by a lot. The only place we expected to lose was D.C., because that's the swamp. Tomorrow, we could very well win every state in record numbers. That's what we're hoping for. They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. And I think it's going to be record-setting. I hope so.
Republicans lost a vote on Mayorkas. They lost a vote on Israel. The RNC chair lost her job, and Donald Trump had his fingerprints on all of it. At some point, maybe we should say the reason that America keeps losing is because of Donald Trump. We can change all of that. But in order to change it, it's going to take a lot of courage. Courage from everybody here. Courage for me to run. And courage for every one of you to know, don't complain about what happens in a general election if you don't vote in this primary. We are blessed to live in America. And we know that America's better than this. Now we have to do something about it. So this is what I will tell you. Tomorrow, you got a job to do. I need you to vote, and I need you to take 10 people with you.
I tell you this, John Heilemann, just watching Nikki Haley and watching her grow on the campaign trail. And I will say, again, Meek and I have known her since she was a state legislator. She's pretty darn good as a state legislator as far as her skill set as a politician. But watching that Nikki Haley on stage and understanding that she's running in Donald Trump's party, I just can't help but look at that person and think, if she were to run as an independent candidate, let's say she could run as an independent candidate and get access in all 50 states, which of course I don't think she could, you know, that person, that message could do better than Ross Perot, especially this year. That's somebody who could actually be a contender as an independent candidate.
I don't know. I mean, there's a chunk of voters who are obviously, as we know, vastly dissatisfied with the choice at the top of the presumptive tops of both tickets. Right. You also have this growth in the independent segment of the electorate. And there's been a lot, you know, in a period for the last 20 or 30 years where we've seen this intense polarization, there hasn't been really much space for, you've got 40%, 42, 43% of both parties of the electorate on one side or the other, that where it didn't matter whether the candidates were anyone they liked, there was just never really space for a third party. People pined for it, but the truth was, beyond even the ballot access questions, in a hyper-polarized climate, the parties were generally pretty satisfied with their respective candidates. This is a different situation, and Joe, I think we're in such uncharted territory in terms of the amount of voter dissatisfaction with Trump and Biden that you might be right. I don't know. The interesting question to me is not so much what would happen if Nikki Haley were to be an independent candidate or a third-party candidate. The interesting question to me is what would have happened. It's the question I think that will haunt a lot of people on the Republican side, is what would have happened if she had found her way to being, to the clarity that she's found and the strength that she's found, the voice she's found, whatever you want to call it. If she had found this position not in January of this year, but last a year ago January, or even last a year ago in June, if she'd been doing this, if she'd been not necessarily just this good, but this clear about the space she occupied in the Republican firmament, how much more of a challenge she might have been to Trump.
I think she was trying to be vice president.
She seemed, I mean, she has toggled between kind of Trump skeptic and Trump admirer for her entire career since Trump's been on the scene. But if she had been in this place and consistently campaigning this way from the middle of last year, how much closer would this Republican nomination fight have been? She just came to she found clarity way too late. And I think that's the big question that kind of hovers over what might have been, and in some sense what happens in the future, because there are still a lot of people who wonder what will happen to Nikki Haley, whether she will have this clarity after she leaves the race, whether that's tomorrow or some other day soon to come.
Yeah.
Well, and perhaps after, oh, I'm sorry, Willie, perhaps, Willie, after she, after this race, after the general election, if Donald Trump loses again, then she has a great argument. If Donald Trump wins, of course, it's a completely different situation. You know, the thing is, Willie, a lot of people made calculations, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis and others, that they could ignore Donald Trump, that they could push him aside, that they could pat his followers on the head, that Alvin Bragg or some other prosecutor was going to take care of Donald Trump. And that's why they didn't do it a year before. And I must say, if somebody were running against a Democrat in a Democratic primary that was suitably damaged, they probably would try to ignore that Democrat and chart their own path. So it has been a very tortured run, but there's always been this lane. And I don't know how big the lane is. Liz Cheney would tell you, and Adam Kinzinger would tell you, not very big. I'm not so sure if you just came forward from the very beginning with the strong conviction, I can win, this guy can't. I'm not so sure she wouldn't be doing better right now, but we are where we are, and this is actually a strong message. She'll probably lose everything tonight, but I don't think she's playing for tonight. I think she's playing for tomorrow. I think she's looking over the horizon.
Yeah, she may have a future. I guess the question is, would it have mattered? We'll never know. But if she had done what John suggests last year and come out stronger and not use the vagaries of kicking sideways, and no one quite knew what any of that meant, trying to have it both ways and keep Donald Trump's supporters, maybe that would have made a difference. Also, maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe this is just Donald Trump's party, and the loyalists are so strong in his corner that it wouldn't have mattered. We just won't know. It is strange, John, to be sitting here on the morning of Super Tuesday, something we've covered so many times before, and really to have no drama whatsoever. Not to say, okay, is this candidate going to steal this state or that state? It's just Donald Trump expected to roll through the 15 states. I guess the question is, will Nikki Haley drop out tonight or tomorrow morning? Will she hang in for a couple more weeks? It'll still be 2 more weeks probably before Donald Trump technically secures the nomination in terms of the number of delegates. But here we are, just rolling toward this general election now as we turn the corner to a State of the Union and everywhere. This feels like a milestone week where now we can see these 2 candidates going head to head.
Yeah, the general election is upon us as of this week. President Biden, of course, going to have a clean sweep tonight on the Democratic side. For Republicans, Nikki Haley's team suggests maybe they have a shot at Vermont, but probably not, and everything. So therefore, Trump's going to win everything there, too. So the question is, what happens next to Haley? Could she even drop out tonight? Is there an event later this week, perhaps in her home state? Her team's not saying. They're also, she herself has all along said, I'm in this through Super Tuesday. Recently has suggested she left the door open to maybe staying in longer than that maybe she'll stay a few more weeks until Trump mathematically becomes the nominee, or even beyond that she wouldn't suspend her campaign. We know that Trump's first criminal trial now just 3 weeks away. Maybe she keeps her eye on that. Maybe she tries to suggest something could happen at the convention. She just wants to keep her options open. She now campaigns the truism, and when they run out of money, at least for now, that's not an issue for Haley. She's still got enough money to keep this going for a while. And what she has done, though, is she has displayed Trump's vulnerabilities. We have seen her put up, even though she's only won 1 contest, the one in Washington, D.C., she's put up a fairly impressive size of the vote in a couple of states, New Hampshire, South Carolina, among them, and revealed some concerns for Trump going forward, some issues he's going to have to address come November. We've seen these polls where a lot of Haley supporters say, I'll never back Donald Trump, even if he's the nominee. I won't do it. I'll either vote for Joe Biden or I'll stay home. And, Mika, as long as she stays in this race and she continues to deliver messages, these anti-Trump messages, she's delivering them to audiences who otherwise wouldn't hear them. She's being covered on Fox News. She's being covered in conservative media who would never play Joe Biden.
And one thing to keep an eye on tonight, Mika, is turnout. We've been talking about this since Iowa, which is, yes, Donald Trump has a big win, but the turnout is tiny, and he gets 50-some% of that turnout. If you look at last night in North Dakota, which he won by 70 or 72 points, that sounds like a big number. he got about 1,800 total votes. So, yes, the
Wow.
margins will be huge, but
Right.
people are not turning out for him in this primary season.
I guess we'll learn a lot by what people do and how they're feeling from the results tonight.
Ahead of Super Tuesday, the former president continued to escalate his recent anti-immigrant rhetoric. In an interview yesterday with a far-right outlet, he likened foreign languages to something from outer space.
We have languages that are like from the planet Mars. Nobody knows how to, speak it. And then these students, and I'm not blaming them, I'm saying they put the students in the place of our students, like in New York City. We have these wonderful students. They're going to school. All of a sudden, they no longer have a seat. They're no longer invited to the school. We're putting migrants in who don't speak the language. They have no idea what the teacher's saying. And we have children that are no longer going to school. They're coming from places unknown, and they're rough people, in many cases from jails, prisons, from mental institutions, insane asylums. Insane asylum, that's Silence of the Lambs stuff. These Hannibal Lecter. Anybody know Hannibal Lecter? We don't want them in this country. And terrorists are coming in at numbers that we haven't seen in many, many decades. It's crazy what they're doing. It doesn't make sense. What they're doing is they're poisoning our country by allowing people to come in by the millions.
So, Joe, that mysterious language is Spanish, as long as we're keeping track.
Que pasa, Donald?
Yeah.
Que pasa?
And by the way,
What
none
did
of
he
this.
say? What did he say?
Vamonos.
Oh my God! What is this on my plate? It's called a fajita.
This is
Seriously.
this is not different than his speech when he came down the escalator 9 years ago. This has exactly been the foundation of his presidential runs, and here he is again, now sprinkling in Hannibal Lecter. I know he's made that reference before, suggesting that I guess Central America and South American countries are emptying their insane asylums and sending people north. He suggested now, too, that people are coming from African prisons. If you want a little dog whistle there, too, he's suggesting the kind of people who are coming into our country, in his view, and maybe of his supporters, are not the kind of people we want here.
Yeah, languages from outer space. Again, we said yesterday he's not well. He's not doing well. But again, we bring up Ronald Reagan all the time here, Mike, and we talk about Reagan's farewell speech to America, and Reagan talking about how when we close the door to immigrants, we close the door to America continuing to thrive. Now, listen, I've said it all along. I want immigrants to come here legally. I don't want them to come here illegally. I've always said that. I always will say that. I think we should have more immigrants. I think they should come here legally. But here's the thing, Mike. President Biden had that deal with Senator Langford from Oklahoma, one of the most conservative senators. They had the deal to do exactly that. They had the deal to do what Republicans have been claiming they want done for years. And Donald Trump, right there, the same Donald Trump talking about aliens, the same Donald Trump talking about poisoning the blood of Americans, the same Donald Trump that is saying, oh, we're letting these terrorists in from African jails, these Hannibal Lecters. Well, he's lying, of course, but if we were, just for argument's sake, if we were, the only way they would be getting through now is because of Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump said, kill this bill. It will help Joe Biden if we actually shut down the border, and I'll take the blame. So, Donald, we blame you. We blame you because it's your fault. You said you would take the blame. And so he kills the bill, and then he cynically goes out bitching about how the border's open, Mike. I'm just curious, how many Americans are too stupid to tie those two things together? It's a good question.
I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, but let's stipulate that immigration is crucial to the future of this country. It's been crucial to our country since its inception. But let's also stipulate that the coverage of things like immigration is skewed. Immigration and the border is a really difficult issue, and it's a problem right now, a problem that needs to be addressed. And as you just pointed out, Senator Langford, along with the cooperation of many Democrats in the Senate and many Republicans in the Senate, came up with a solution. They had a solution. Donald Trump knows it was a solution and said, no, we don't want that solution because I want to use it to run against Joe Biden this fall. The other aspect of this was the film clip we showed coming into this segment. And it gets to the way this election and these two men are covered by major newspapers. On Sunday, the New York Times had a front-page story about a poll that parts of it were devastating to the chances for Joe Biden to win re-election. On Monday, on the front page above the fold, they had another story about Joe Biden referencing the poll, but again referencing Joe Biden's age. Why is it that they don't cover things that we just saw and heard? A man who is literally losing his mind in front of audiences coast to coast. His name is Donald J. Trump. Why is it that this is not covered in a similar fashion to the way Joe Biden's age is covered? Joe Biden knows how old he is, and Joe Biden does more in 1 hour in a day in the White House than Donald Trump has ever done in his presidency. And Rev, I don't know about you. I hate to criticize print media. I'm a print media guy, but this is out of control.
No, it is out of control, and it's really unfair to the American public who has to vote on the facts that are presented to them. And when you only give one picture, you're talking about Biden's age when Trump is around the same age. Yeah. And you're ignoring on the front page above the fold the blatant racism, because we're not talking about immigration alone, what Donald Trump is talking about. We're talking about open racism. He's mocking Spanish-speaking people. He mocks Africans. He called several African countries S-hole countries and Haiti. It's always anti-people of color. That ought to be on the front page. And then you have the nerve to let him say, when he has an opportunity to speak of the grandeur and strength of the history of people of color, he goes in front of a black conservative group and say, you like me because of the mugshot I took. You like me because I have all these indictments. Yeah. So he is running what he entered into politics. He entered into politics on birtherism, denying a black president was born here.
Muslim
He's
bans.
running on the bias and racism that was always the major part of his campaign, and they will not write about that. They're telling us about one old white man rather than another old white man who has not only lost his mind, but when he had one, it was bigoted.
It's getting more bigoted. I mean, and angry, and the slurring of his words. I mean, on the one hand, a family member should step in. And I mean, this was my family member. I would be taking him to a memory care or something to get help. I'm dead serious, not a joke.
It's really sad.
But also, this is all baked in. We have two candidates that both have served as president. And you mentioned some things that happened during Donald Trump's presidency. I mean, start with Charlottesville, and the list would last the whole show. Whether it's racist things, bigoted things, things he said and done towards women. In fact, his first trial, the one that people say is less serious, is having sex with a porn star and then using campaign finance funds to pay. I mean, I don't know. I think that's pretty serious. And if you broke the law, then you should be, you should innocent until proven guilty. But if you broke the law, it should be addressed. Everything about this man is shocking. And you have his record of 4 years in office. Take a look at it, because it's telling us that what we're seeing now isn't shocking, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't cover it. It doesn't mean that we should be desensitized and not notice that he looks demented, that he looks like he might be having a stroke, that he sounds especially cruel. We shouldn't ignore this and then go, oh, Joe Biden's old, he walks funny. When a doctor said for years now he's had numbing in his feet or whatever, and it causes this, and that he's got a stutter. We know this. Joe Biden will tell you this. He will tell you this himself. It's not like news. It's not. Has anyone not heard this before about Joe Biden? It's been out there when he ran and when he was president. So we have two presidents and two presidencies to look at. People need to focus. Trump will remain on the ballot despite efforts in some states to make him ineligible for the 2024 election. The Supreme Court yesterday unanimously rejected the ruling from Colorado's Supreme Court that removed the former president from the ballot based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Now, the justices ruled that a patchwork of decisions around the country could send elections into chaos if state officials had the freedom to determine who could appear on the ballot. The decision makes clear that it is up to Congress to enforce the insurrectionist clause against federal office holders and candidates. But the three liberal justices accused their conservative colleagues of going too far by ruling Congress must enact new legislation in order to ban a presidential candidate. They wrote that this decision will make it harder to bar, quote, an oath-breaking insurrectionist from becoming president. Willie.
Let's bring into the conversation former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg. So, Chuck, this was widely expected. I don't know if it was expected to be unanimous, but it is at 9-0 on the vote here. I should point out conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett also wrote a concurrence critical of some pieces of her colleagues' ruling on this. This talks about federal office holders, which is to say the state does not have the right to keep a federal candidate off the ballot. It can do that with state candidate and local candidates, but not federal. Are you surprised at all by anything you saw in this decision yesterday?
Not really, Willie, with one asterisk. If you had listened to the oral argument last month, it was pretty clear that the vote was going to be lopsided, 8-1, 9-0, turned out to be 9-0, to prohibit states from determining the qualifications for candidates for federal office. So the 9-0 vote didn't surprise me very much. There was, as you noted, a concurring opinion and a disagreement. Not just the three so-called liberal justices, but Justice Amy Coney Barrett as well, who thought that the majority on the court went a bit too far. A bit too far, Willie, by deciding a question not before them, which was, how do you give effect to the disqualification clause of the 14th Amendment, the one that Mika just so ably described? Do you have to do it through congressional legislation? 5 justices said yes, and 4 said you don't need to reach that question. But on the core question, the most important question, it was a 9-0 vote prohibiting states from determining whether or not someone can stand for federal office.
So, conservative columnist David French writes about the decision in a new piece for the New York Times entitled, "The Supreme Court Just Erased Part of the Constitution." And here's part of it. As of Monday, March 4th, 2024, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution is essentially a dead letter, at least as it applies to candidates for federal office. Now, Section 3 is different from other sections of the amendment. It requires federal legislation to enforce its terms, at least as applied to candidates for federal office. Through inaction alone, Congress can effectively erase part of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court has effectively replaced a very high bar for allowing insurrectionists into federal office, a supermajority vote by Congress with the lowest bar imaginable, congressional inaction. The fact that Congress has not acted should not effectively erase the words from the constitutional page. Chaotic enforcement of the Constitution may be suboptimal, but it's far better than not enforcing the Constitution at all. What do you make of that, Joe?
Well, I was going to ask Chuck his opinion on David French's insights. Chuck?
Yeah, Joe, I read it this morning. I read his article, and he makes a really important point that Congress, by doing absolutely nothing, which is absolutely what they do best, has essentially stripped the disqualification clause from operation, right? They've essentially made it, they've rendered it moot. Here's the problem. By going too far, the Supreme Court has really limited the ways in which someone can be disqualified. You need Congress to pass federal legislation. Now, Amy Coney Barrett and the 3 so-called liberal justices would have said something different. A, we don't have to decide this, but B, there might be other ways for Congress or federal courts to breathe life into the disqualification clause. So I think David French's article is an important one to read. Like I said, I read it myself. I even understood it, which doesn't happen all that often. But he's right. It has essentially become a nullity. The ability to keep an insurrectionist from the ballot turns on Congress acting. And as we discussed earlier, that's what Congress does worst.
You know, Willie, this underlines a point that we've at times said about what could be happening on the left, like the criticisms of Alvin Bragg, bringing a case under a new theory or sort of piecing things together in a way that make constitutional scholars uneasy on both sides. In this case, you have the Supreme Court lurching too far to the right, making, as David French said, this part of the 14th Amendment a dead letter. You could also raise a lot of the same questions, which we need to do about some of these state cases as well. Right now in Fulton County, there's mess down there with the prosecutor. What happens if there's a prosecutor in West Texas that wants to, charge the next Democratic president? These are all questions that do need to be raised, and we've been raising them on one side on is there overreach on the left that will impact future Democratic presidents. Here you have overreach, it seems, by a conservative Supreme Court who, well, let's just face it, that's what they've been doing best over the past year or so. Overreach by the Supreme Court in a way that, again, has nullified, effectively, as David French said, nullified an extraordinarily important clause in the 14th Amendment.
Yeah, and that's why it was so interesting to see that concurrence, not just from the more liberal members of the court, but from Justice Amy Coney Barrett saying to her colleagues, guys, we need to turn down the temperature, not turn it up, and create more chaos in our system. So she, while voting with the majority, of course, unanimous, critical in some ways of the specifics of the ruling. That's the legal side of it, John. Yeah. Let's talk about the politics for a second. I think we all have heard from some Democrats and maybe people working on other campaigns saying this was worth pursuing, but perhaps even a little relief that it turned out this way, because if he's kept off the ballot, it gives him rocket fuel for the next 8 months to say the Biden administration, the Justice Department, et cetera, everything he likes to say, is trying to strip away your right to vote, to keep me off the ballot. So they say, we can beat him in Colorado, put him on the ballot.
Right. A sigh of relief from a lot of Democrats yesterday. The idea being that if a few blue states had taken him off the ballot, yes, that it would just fuel his grievances, his deep state conspiracies, and would just fire up the enthusiasm. And I think chaos is the right word. I think that they were right to rule the way that they did. A lot of campaigns would concur on that. Now, Donald Trump, of course, appeared yesterday at Mar-a-Lago. He praised the decision. And also, Chuck Rosenberg, we heard from Trump talk about the other matter that's about to be in front of the Supreme Court, that of presidential immunity. We know those oral arguments are scheduled for next month. Just give us your latest thinking as to how those arguments could go and when, perhaps most importantly, when we'll hear from the justices in terms of their decision, because that will impact whether or not any of these trials happen before the election.
Yeah, let me start with the when, Jonathan. The argument in the Supreme Court on the question of presidential immunity from criminal process is April 22nd. The Supreme Court term ends at the end of June. So we will certainly have a decision, or we should have a decision, by the end of June, although it could come quicker. The decision in the case we were just discussing on the 14th Amendment disqualification clause took about 4 weeks. So no later than the end of June, we should have a decision. I am still somewhat bullish. I may be the last person on the planet who believes that this case could be tried before the election, the January 6th insurrection case in federal court in Washington. The sooner the Supreme Court makes a decision, the clearer it will be whether or not we can have that trial. So to your first question, Jonathan, Mr. Trump lost decisively in the district court and again decisively and unanimously in federal court of appeals on the immunity question. I expect he will lose again. The answer seems pretty clear. A president is not immune for conduct while president, except perhaps in a very narrow band of cases involving official acts. And trying to thwart a fair and free election cannot possibly be an official act. So the sooner the Supreme Court gets to that determination, the clearer we will, the better we will know whether or not we can have a trial before the election. I still think we can. Like I said, I might be the last person on the planet, but I'm somewhat bullish.
Okay, former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg, thank you very much for coming on the show. And Molly is from the and she writes in a piece in Vanity Fair entitled "Republicans Own the IVF Mess." And you write, Molly, in part this: one of the ways Donald Trump won in 2016 was by empowering the far-right Republican base. Trump opened a Pandora's box, and Republicans are scrambling to shut it ahead of November. Unfortunately for Republicans, they've forgotten how to even pretend to be normal. IVF is a dumb hill for Republicans to die on, but it's a great example of just how hard it is to put the toothpaste back in the tube when you've spent years appeasing evangelicals and rejecting science. It's only a matter of time before this fetal personhood challenge comes back, and with it, a legal challenge to IUDs and morning after pills and maybe even birth control pills. Once you go down the road of religious zealotry, there is no easy off-ramp. Trump may have had some good political instincts, but this could be the one that cripples the Republican Party in the end. And we go back to the election in Virginia. We go back to midterms. Women will turn out, not just women, men will turn out on this issue of losing 50 years of rights.
Yeah. It's this, they put themselves, I mean, the idea, almost no one in this country believes that 5 frozen cells are a person.
That you have to keep frozen.
Right, that you have to keep frozen, and they're 5 cells, that's a person. I mean, a very small section of this country believes that to be true. So you've set yourself up for a disaster. And look, Republicans control one branch, barely, and the person they put in charge of it was Mike Johnson, a guy who has, hours and hours of religious zealotry on tape. Right? They could have picked Tom Emmers. They could have picked someone who read as a Paul Ryan, but instead they went with Trump's preferred candidate. And we've seen this again and again. Trump is a terrible candidate picker, right? And he has this love affair with the far right. So they've really set themselves up. And IVF is wildly popular. And birth control, as well it should be, is also popular. So they are setting themselves up with a real problem.
Yeah.
So, Molly, something like 2% of American babies are born through IVF. I'm sure half of them are Democrats and half of them are Republicans. They are not uniquely Democrats. Spell out what the situation is now with the other states that are looking at limiting, because it's not just Alabama. There are, some 10 other states? And then those 3 states, Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, who are also looking at trying to curb IUDs and the morning after pill. Where do all of those states stand? And in the ruling after Alabama and the pushback from Republicans against that, could those states now decide, okay, actually, you know what, that was a bridge too far and we're going to back away from this? Or are they pushing ahead?
Yeah, so Alabama actually did do legislation that said, that said you are not going to face manslaughter charges if you destroy a 5-celled embryo, which, congratulations to Alabama. I mean, talk about, a very, lame victory. So, people may be able to continue IVF in the state of Alabama, but think about how crazy this is. I mean, Mike Pence had his kids through IVF. This is not a person who's a wild leftist, Mike Pence. So the fact that we're even here shows what trouble Republicans are in. And look, there are going to be a lot of states, there are going to be a lot of challenges. But this fetal personhood, which really should be called embryonic personhood, is part of these heartbeat bills, which again, these, are multi-celled, frozen organisms, not necessarily. The idea that this is a child is wild stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and let me just say, Mika, just a little Southern Baptist programming note here. There's nothing wrong with if Mike Johnson had religious studies or what. Nothing wrong with that. As we've talked about, my parents took me to church 2, 3, 4 nights a week. It didn't take. I know what you're saying. It didn't take. But a lot of it did. And the thing is, it's not that Mike Johnson is I think some holy, some holy example who is guided by the Bible. First of all, he got to power based on the biggest lie in recent American history. So Jesus didn't get him there. The lie did. But there's also, again, this bears repeating because of the self-righteousness of so many on the far Trump right. Mm-hmm. They've invented a religion. This Christian nationalism. They've invented a religion. And it keeps getting more extreme every week. IVF now is, I guess, the devil's playhouse. Mike Pence had kids through IVF. So now what? Is he a heretic, or are they gonna hang him? They wanted to. Is his wife a witch? Are they gonna have witch trials now? I will say this again, and let those who have ears to hear. When I was in high school, the Southern Baptist Convention was pro-choice. In fact, they were pro-choice from the time of Jesus through the time the Beatles broke up. But wait, there's more. Not only through the time the Beatles broke up were these Protestant denominations pro-choice, they were pro-choice through the time the Eagles broke up. Yes, through the long run. All right? Through the long run. We can go the distance if our heart... you know the song. Think about that for a second as they're waving their Bibles in your face and telling you that you are insufficiently Christian because you don't believe what Jerry Falwell, Richard Viguerie, and Paul Weyrich decided, please stay with me, decided in 1979 they had to do to beat a Democratic president who happened to be Southern Baptist. They couldn't say he was insufficiently Christian because he taught Sunday school every Sunday, basically. And he was a good and decent man. So what did they do? Stay with me. I know you don't want to hear it out there, but stay with me because it is the truth. They invented the issue of abortion as a religion, not just as a political issue. But Jerry Falwell, Richard Viguerie, a Republican operative, and Paul Weyrich, a direct mail specialist, Republican, they said, we're going to create abortion not just as a political issue, we're going to make it a religious issue. And by making it a religious issue, again, the long run had already been released by the Eagles. They had broken up. They said, Elvis Costello's My Aim Is True had already been out 3 years. They decided at this point, people, by the way, at this point, had already thrown away their leisure suits and their pet rocks. This is how far removed from the birth of Jesus Christ this was. Now, Chia Pets were people still have their Chia Pets.
Yeah.
Still with us now, by the way. But they decided we're going to make abortion a religious issue. And that way, Jimmy Carter can take votes from conservative Catholics and working class Protestants. That's what they figured out. And now you fast forward all these years later, and you talk to most of my friends, they will tell you, oh yeah, abortion, that's a religious issue. That's like you know what it's like? It's like the death penalty is what it's like, actually. You read the Bible, and your view of the Bible can inform you on these issues. But the fact, Mika, that they now are saying not only is abortion a religious issue and you're going to hell if you're pro-choice. wonder about my mom and my grandmom and my dad and people who went to church for week after week after week after my grandmom. I mean, this would be quite a shock to her that she was insufficiently Christian when she worshipped and prayed and lived one of the most devout lives ever. This would be a real shock that since she was in the Southern Baptist Convention, she's going to hell because the Southern Baptist Convention was pro-choice. But now it's gotten even more extreme, as these things do.
Yeah.
And so now abortion is banned. If your 10-year-old girl is raped by an illegal immigrant and you don't want your 10-year-old girl to have to carry the illegal immigrant's baby to term, you don't want the state to force your 10-year-old girl to have a baby, there are people who think you're going to hell. Listen, I wouldn't want to be standing in front of Jesus, like at the end of my life, answering for what I did to that 10-year-old girl, forcing her and her parents to flee the state because of some religious precept that was created in 1980 in the Protestant church by Jerry Falwell, Richard Viguerie, and Paul Weyrich. And now they come for IVF. Why are we surprised? Is anybody surprised? Because when they took the constitutional right for a woman to choose away from women for the first time in 50 years, they warned us. Clarence Thomas warned us. He said, now that we've looked at this, we need to look at interracial marriages. We need, oh wait, no, he didn't say that. We need to look at contraception. We need to look at marriage equality. We need to look, and he went down the list. Yeah. Why are we surprised? And for you people out there who think that it is going to end here, you are dreaming.
Yeah.
Because now what they call Christian nationalism has nothing to do with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we have seen through history, Reverend Al, people drunk with power and using religion for political power, it always ends badly.
Let's go straight to the big board on this Super Tuesday. NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki. Steve, your latest article for NBCNews.com explains why the delegate math shows Haley has little room to stop Trump. So I'm curious, given all that and what we're looking at tonight, what you'll be looking for digging into the numbers tonight.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, first of all, the big picture thing to keep in mind here is you look in yellow, all the states on the Republican side with contests today. The rules on the Republican side for this primary season are designed to produce a quick and decisive winner, a quick and decisive nominee. So keep that in mind when you look at the rules inside of some of these states. That's Haley's first challenge. I'll give you the most dramatic example on the map. It's the biggest state on the map, California. 169 delegates up for grabs today. That's the biggest of any state. And in California, there are two major things working against Haley. Number one, it is a closed primary. There are no independents, no Democrats who are allowed to participate. We have seen that is the backbone of her strength in a lot of these contests we've had so far. And secondly, in California, the rules are a simple majority of the statewide vote, 50% plus one, and you get all 169 delegates. So the combination of that threshold and a closed primary makes Donald Trump the overwhelming favorite to collect all 169 in California. The second biggest prize today is Texas, 161 delegates. Rules are a little bit different than California, but again, this is a very conservative Republican electorate in Texas. Demographically, it is very much Trump-friendly. It doesn't fit the profile of some of these states, some of these areas in states that Nikki Haley has fared the best. And again, it's winner-take-all for a statewide pool of at-large delegates, and then it's winner-take-all in each one of the congressional districts. Do you just look at the demographics of Texas, you compare it to what we've seen so far, and Trump is heavily favored to take the overwhelming share of these 161. Basically, with those two states right away, you can expect probably Trump to be north of 300 delegates just there. And then you add in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, in Alabama. These are essentially winner-take-all states. Huge favorable demographics for Donald Trump there. Tennessee, it's a little quirky with some fine print in the rules, but that could be another target for Trump to get all of the delegates here. So where could Haley make any kind of noise tonight, maybe make a splash? Probably her best chance to win a state is right here. It is Vermont. Vermont, Donald Trump in the 2016 primaries, the first time he ran, only got 32% of the vote in Vermont. There's no party registration in Vermont. Independents, Democrats, people who think of themselves that way, free to participate in this. And obviously, it's a deeply blue state, so you might have a lot of voters who don't really consider themselves Republicans, but who like the chance to vote against Donald Trump. So you could see that in Vermont. Virginia is interesting, too, especially congressional districts in the northern part of the state here, just outside Washington, D.C. Demographically, they absolutely fit the profile of where Haley's been doing well in these primaries. In fact, they're even better demographically for her than a lot of the areas that have voted so far. In Virginia, you can collect delegates by congressional districts, so there are opportunities for Haley to pick off some there. Minnesota and Colorado, again, complicated rules, but she could get a chunk of the delegates there. But the bottom line here is she's been talking, 43% in New Hampshire is her high water mark. If you're getting 43% across the board tonight, that is going to translate into very few delegates. And meanwhile, Donald Trump, that lead he has right now over Haley, he could be near 1,000 delegates if it breaks, sort of as I'm showing here. If it breaks that way, he could be near 1,000 delegates by the end of tonight, with 1215 the magic number.
And of course, the Haley campaign has pledged that she'd stay in through Super Tuesday. That's today. Beyond that, we're not quite sure what the future holds. Steve, though, Trump has racked up win after win after win during this process outside of the District of Columbia. But there have been warning signs, too, like whether it's a turnout or percentage of votes that he's received, that point to some vulnerabilities for the fall. What are you going to be looking at tonight that could be more flashing warning signs for Trump, even if he wins, but could have concern level for the general election?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's interesting. I mean, we know we've known since 2016 where Trump's problems are and where his vulnerabilities are in a general election. They're in the suburbs. They're with typically college-educated voters in the suburbs, a little bit more on the higher income side of things. And so that is where he has had his worst showing so far in these primaries. Haley was able to win a congressional district in South Carolina down by Charleston, had by far the highest concentration of college-educated voters in the state of any congressional district. So there, as I say, there are districts in Virginia that fit that. There's some districts in Minnesota that fit that. There's some places in Colorado that fit that. So you're looking there, for Trump's weakness tonight. But in terms of how applicable it is to the general election, I would just caution on that, because we've seen this in the polling now consistently, and we had 4 new polls come out over the weekend, 4 new major national polls on top of our own NBC poll from a few weeks ago that all put Donald Trump ahead by a slight margin. And when you look inside those polls and you look at what looks like potential slippage with Republican voters in these primaries, you do not see it in general election polls. You look at Republican voters in general election polling, Trump is getting more than 90% and losing only 2 or 3% of them. And I think one of the things you're seeing in these primaries is that there is evidence in states that have open primaries or semi-open primaries that there's a large segment of voters who are going to vote for Biden in the fall, who voted for Biden in 2020, who absolutely can't stand Donald Trump, and they tend to be in these suburban areas, who are participating in the Republican primary. The rules allow them to. They want to vote against Trump. They take the opportunity to do it. And I think that's added in these states to some of that non-Trump total, because the polling is also suggesting here a lot of that Haley vote will indeed, the general election polling we saw over the weekend, a lot of that Haley vote is prepared to go and back Donald Trump. So, we'll take a look at those suburbs as they come in tonight. But I also think, as we were saying last week with Biden in Michigan and that uncommitted vote, there's some reason to take it with a pretty big grain of salt.
All right, NBC's Steve Kornacki. I know you'll be watching every moment of this. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. to break down today's results. And Allie, we'll start with you. What are you hearing from the Haley campaign and from voters today?
Yeah, look, Mika, this is not usually what election days will look like. Vaughn and I should be at campaign headquarters, at watch parties, and instead we're probably just going to be standing in pretty generic locations because neither of these candidates are out on the campaign trail actively campaigning. Of course, Trump will be at Mar-a-Lago, and Haley, for her part, I'm told, is going to likely be watching the results tonight come in from her home on Kiowa Island. As for her campaign staff, several of them are likely to gather at campaign headquarters. They did do their final event last night in Texas. It was a raucous crowd in Fort Worth. But this is what some of them said to me, mainly the fact that they want Haley, or they're probably going for Biden. Watch.
Have y'all ever voted Trump?
No.
So what happens in 2024 if it's Trump versus Biden?
No. Are we on camera?
Biden, probably.
For you?
I've been voting since I was 18, you know. I'm a strict Republican, but I'm not going for Trump.
Yeah. So you'll go for Biden?
I'll vote for whoever. I want to vote for Haley. That's who I want to vote for. That's why I'm here.
He's going to stick in the race, and we're going to be able to vote for her.
But what happens if on Wednesday morning she wakes up and Tuesday was a clean sweep across the board for Trump? Should she stay in or get out?
I think she should stay in. Yeah, she's got, like she says, she's got a lot more states to come.
And look, Mika, she might. I think that if we're reading the tea leaves here, the Haley campaign has been specifically vague about what happens after this mile marker of Super Tuesday. On the one hand, Haley has said in donor meetings and publicly that she wants to have the strongest showing possible that she can on Super Tuesday. She's been vague in saying she'll be in this race for as long as she's competitive. That's not exactly a specific metric that we should be looking for here, but Haley could, in the same way that she could end up ending her bid tonight, she could also end up staying in through Georgia, through Louisiana. That would put her through the end of the month. The Trump campaign, as Vaughn will tell you, doesn't expect and can't clinch their bid tonight. Haley could go until he does. It's not a money problem, as it often is with these campaigns. Haley has been a prolific fundraiser and has a lot of money still in the bank. That could allow her to keep going. And then, of course, the other question that I was asking voters is, what if she doesn't, and she does or doesn't endorse the former president? Haley said she didn't seem bound by that RNC pledge to endorse the eventual nominee. She said she's going to do what she wants to do. But for voters that I spoke to, many of them, whether they would vote for Trump in a general or not, those Haley supporters say they would be disappointed if she endorsed him, at least right off the bat, Mika.
NBC's Ali Vitale, thank you very much.